Well, I didn't say this earlier. My name's Kyle. I have the opportunity to serve as the lead pastor here, and it's good to be back with you this week. We're going to start a new series called Prodigal. This is going to be a familiar story, but I really hope you hear something new in it. I need your help real quick. How many of you are oldest child in your family? Oldest child? Okay. How many of you are the youngest? Yeah, right. That's what younger kids, the youngest, the babies, we're excited to be the younger. Middle. I'm sorry, I forgot about you. How many middle children? I'm just kidding. The middle are always forgotten about. I'm just kidding. But this story we're going to look at, there is no middle child, but there is going to be an older child, the elder son, and there's going to be a younger son, and then there's going to be a father in this story. And so we're going to spend 3 weeks looking at one passage, one teaching of Jesus. I think this is one of the most significant, important stories that Jesus tells. It has the gospel, the good news of Jesus, in it completely. And so we're going to learn a ton through the next couple of weeks. If you don't have a Bible, there's Bibles in the back. You can either get up and get one, you can raise a hand, someone will get you one. If you have a smartphone, download uversion.com, you can read along, or it'll be on the screen. I really hope you'll be here each week. It's going to build each week on itself. So it's important, if you miss a week, you may feel like you've missed something in this series. And so we hope you'll be here every week. Well, let's get right to it. Luke 15. If you did grab one of those red Bibles when you came in, it'll be on page 883. And I put the wrong page number up there. But 883 if you have one of those Bibles. All right, so here we go. Luke 15, 1 and 2. We're going to start there. It says, "Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathered around to hear him." Now, let's stop real quick. We're going to stop as we go along here in this first part. The tax collectors and the sinners were gathered around to hear Jesus. The tax collectors would have been considered the worst of the worst. What was happening is the Roman rule was taxing the Jewish people. And the Jewish people, some of them became tax collectors and began to work for Rome. So they were taxing their own people, and then on top of that tax, they were taking more. They were basically stealing from their own people. And so as you read this, it's interesting that it labels them and sinners. So sinners are the wicked, those who are devoted to sin, and the tax collectors, the worst of the worst, were gathered around Jesus. This word, welcomed by Jesus. They were attracted to Jesus. Now, this is what we have to understand at the very, very beginning, is that it was about Jesus. It was about Jesus. It wasn't about a building. It wasn't about a pastor. It wasn't about anything else but Jesus. They were gathered around because they wanted to hear what he had to say. They wanted to experience Jesus. And so they would do all they could to be around him. We're doing a flooring project on the other end, and I talked to the staff about this this week as we look at what's been done down there, and we like it or you don't like it or whatever. And this is what I told them. It's a floor. It is a floor. We didn't do it because we wanted to. We did it because we needed to. It's going to serve a purpose. It is not about the floor. It is about Jesus. It's not about a style of music. It's not about a song we choose. It is about Jesus. So everything we do in the community, everything we do here is about being near to Jesus. And so specifically, if you're here today, if you call yourself a Christian, if you say you're a follower of Jesus, and at any point there's something in you that gets in the way, anything that we do that we elevate above who Jesus is, that's a problem. And so we see at the very beginning, the people who get it right are the tax collectors and the sinners who realize they want to be near Jesus. Let's go, verse 2. But, I just think it's interesting, there's a need for this but here. It says, but the Pharisees, this is who the Pharisees are, they are the religious elite. Their whole concern is how they looked on the external. So they weren't concerned necessarily with their heart. They weren't concerned with their private life. All they were concerned about is, how do people see me? How do people perceive me? So I want to do the right things. I want to be seen as a good, moral person. And so they followed the law really, really well. So you have the Pharisees, and then you have the teachers of the law. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered. They start to whisper. They start to complain. And here's what they say. This man welcomes sinners and eats with them. Now, it's really interesting. As Jesus comes, the people who are attracted to him are the people who are the farthest away from him, or that society should say are the farthest away from him. The outcasts, the sinners, the tax collectors, and the people who had a problem with him were the religious people. The religious people didn't like Jesus, but the sinners and the tax collectors did. And so they start to murmur, what's this guy Jesus doing with those people? Not only was he welcoming them in, but he was eating with them. You know what it's like to go to someone's house and have a meal? That's a personal experience. Like when you go to someone's house, some people have certain rules, like some people want you to take their shoes off when you go into their house. And so there's always that uncomfortable, do I take my shoes off? Do I leave my shoes on? What if my kids don't like the meal and they say something? Not that that's ever happened, but what if they say something about the food that they don't like? It is a personal experience to go into someone's house and to have a meal. It is an intimate thing. What you're saying is, I want to be with you. I accept you. And these Pharisees and the tax collectors can't stand that that's what Jesus is doing with those people. And so they start to complain and they start to murmur. Now, Jesus has become extremely popular. Extremely popular. And in becoming popular, again, he's popular with the wrong people. Not the religious people. The people who have been doing life all wrong. That's who Jesus is popular with. So this shows me that Jesus looks past social expectations. He looks past external situations. He even looks past what's acceptable in culture, and he sees people. Now, as I was studying through this, I even typed up a Facebook post, and I was getting ready to send it. And my thought was that Jesus doesn't see labels on people. He doesn't see people, but then I started thinking, I think he does. I think he does. I think he sees race and he sees culture and he sees people's past, but that doesn't define his love for people. So he sees people. He sees the labels. He sees the labels that people have put on those people. He sees where you've been, where you've come from, and it doesn't matter. He loves those people anyways, and there's something that's happening to the sinners. There's something that's happening to the tax collectors. They love it, and they've longed for it. But the religious people are being pushed away. They don't like it, and they've made it known to one another. And so I wonder today, who would it be? Like if Jesus was here, if Jesus walked the earth today, who would he be with? I mean, think about it. In your head, who do you first think of? In your mind, who would you define as the worst of the worst? Who are our current tax collectors? That's who Jesus would be with. And then the question you have to ask yourself is, how do you feel about that? How do you feel about that? Because we see in the very beginning that the religious people don't like it. They don't like it. And then Jesus, being Jesus, knows what they're talking about. And so he always had this way of just breaking into story. He just breaks into story. And so he's going to tell 3 stories. And we're not going to look at the first 2, but he tells a story about a lost sheep. And the shepherd who has 100 sheep and he loses one. And he leaves the 99 who are doing what they're supposed to go find the one who's ran away. He throws him over his shoulder. He comes back and he says, we have to celebrate because the one that was lost has now been found. Then he says there's a woman who has 10 coins and she loses 1 coin. And she tears up her house to find this 1 coin because that 1 coin means a lot. It is significant to her. And so she'll stop everything she's doing to find that 1 coin. So she finds it, and she says, it was lost, but it has been found. We must celebrate. We must party because what was lost has been found. And in both those situations, the one who has lost the item has gone after it. This story is going to look a little different, and this story is a little bit longer. I'm going to read the whole story through, and then we're going to look at the first part this week. So here we go, verse 11. Jesus continued, there was a man who had 2 sons. This is often called the parable of the lost son or the prodigal son, but there are 2 sons, both very significant in the story. The younger one said to his father, 'Father, give me my share of the estate.' So he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in the whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, 'How many of my father's hired men have food to spare? And here I am, starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired men.' So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The son said to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' And so they began to celebrate." Okay, so we're going to stop here. We're going to look at the younger son. It's going to be hard for me not to want to talk a lot about the father, but we're going to look at that week 3. Next week, we'll finish with the elder son. But it's so important for us to get an idea of why Jesus tells this story. So the boy comes to him and says, "Dad," this is basically what he says to him, "Dad, I wish you were dead. I wish you were dead. I want what's coming to me after you die, but I'm not willing to wait. And so I wish you were dead. Go ahead and give me now what's coming to me later." This is a huge sign of disrespect. A huge sign of disrespect. This is what amazes me about the Bible, and some people not necessarily believing that the stories are true or not. It would be nearly impossible for someone during this time to make up this story. And here's why. Because it would have never happened. The father would have never given the son what he asked for. All commentaries that I read, anyone who was way smarter than me said that during that time and even today, a patriarch in the Middle East, if this boy was to come to him and say, "Dad, I wish you were dead, give me what is mine," they said the only option he would have had was to drive him out, verbally abusive and physically abusive. That would have been the only response. And so Jesus tells this story. No one would have had any kind of context to put this in, because it would have never happened. And so Jesus totally changes what people expect. It says, look, the father actually responds and gives it to him. And this is extremely significant because it would have been extremely embarrassing for the father to do. The community would have looked at the father and said, "Who are you?" He would have lost honor. He would have lost his position in the community. And more importantly, he would have cost him financially. He would have had to have sold property. And property was everything. One of the greatest musicals ever, Oklahoma. I'm from Oklahoma, and so one of the greatest musicals ever, Oklahoma. There's a song that comes from that. Maybe you know it. But in that song, Tim Keller, a great pastor in the Northeast up in New York, he points this out. He says that in that song, it says this: "We know we belong to the land, and the land we belong to is grand." This is a foreign idea to us because we don't look at our land that way. Our property belongs to us, but it hasn't always been that way. What you owned was extremely important to you. It would be in your family forever. And so he would have had to liquidate. He would have had to sell. He would have had to get rid of things to give to his son, who just said, "Dad, I wish you were dead." And he would have given him a third. So in that culture, he would have given him a third of everything. And the elder son would get 2/3. That's how it would work. And so he has to do whatever he needs to do to get the younger son his 1/3 of the estate. And then it says that the younger son takes that, and pretty soon after, he sets off for a distant country. He runs away. He leaves the father because the whole time, the younger son basically is saying, "I want your stuff, but I don't want you. I want your stuff, but I don't want you. I don't want your love. I don't want your presence. I don't need you. I just need your things." And so for us to look at that practically, for us, the younger son in a lot of us will often do that with God. We'll say, look, I want the blessing, I want everything that you have to give me, but God, I don't really need you. I don't necessarily need to be obedient, I don't need to necessarily follow you, I just want what you can give me. And that's what the younger son has done. And so he takes his stuff and he runs away. Now, he doesn't run to a good community. He's not leaving to go to a better place. I wonder if he had this place in mind and he knew where he wanted to go to live freely. Because when he leaves the Father, for a moment he's going to feel free. But he's soon going to find himself in complete misery. And that's what happens with us a lot of time when we're disobedient, when we run from God. Man, it feels freeing for a time. But then we'll begin to find ourselves in misery. And so he packs his stuff and he leaves. And he leaves to a place that there's no clean living. We went to California, and we lived in California for a little while. And I don't know if you've been to California or a place called Venice Beach. Anybody ever been to Venice Beach? I'd been to Venice Beach a lot with my wife, but it was a completely different experience with a 5-year-old and a 9-year-old. There were moments I wish my daughter couldn't read, T-shirts, signs. It is one of the worst places I have ever been, but I had never recognized it till I walked through it with a 5-year-old and a 9-year-old. You can only imagine what my kids experience. And so I'm walking like this in front of my kids as we walk down Venice Beach. But Venice Beach, we left, and my wife was like, man, that is a dirty place. Dirty place for lots of different reasons, and lots of different people find themselves at Venice Beach, and lots of people become homeless at Venice Beach. And this is what happens to this boy. He takes his stuff, and he goes to a place, and he squanders his wealth. He wastes it. And so this word prodigal, you've probably heard it a lot. This word prodigal, it says it here, it's to spend freely and recklessly. Spend it freely and recklessly, and to wastefully extravagant. To just waste extravagantly, just to throw it away. It actually is a term that would be to scatter seed. So it's this picture, this boy just goes and he just throws his money away in wild living. And we'll find out later that the older son is going to point out that he wasted it on prostitutes. This is where this younger son has run to. And the real issue is that this younger son has a major heart problem. It's not just an external thing. It's not just the actions. It's not just the decisions he's made. It really comes down to his heart. And ultimately what the problem is, and it's the problem for all of us, is he's got a problem making idols. He's got an idol problem. And so idolatry is all throughout the Bible. And so idolatry is when you take a good thing and you make it an ultimate thing. You take a good thing and you make it an ultimate thing. Something that will satisfy, something that will complete you. It'll give you meaning. It will give you purpose. Everything you've longed for, you think, if I could just get that, everything would be okay. And so he's got an idol problem. And he thinks, I'm going to leave my father who had everything for me, and I'm going to go look for it somewhere else. And so he goes and he runs and he does that. And we do it too. I do it too. One of the things when we were in California that we did in LA is you can go into like the Hollywood area and they make these maps. And so you pick up a map and it'll tell you where famous people live. And so I'm almost embarrassed to say that my wife and I did this. We picked up a map, we drove around, and we'd pull up to a house and be like, oh, John Travolta lives there. I can't see it because there's bushes and walls, but he lives there. And you drive around and you see these places, and there's something that begins to happen in your heart. It's just natural and normal, and you think, oh man, how great would that be? How great would that be to have all of that? We stayed at a house at a friend of ours out there had some friends that we stayed with up in Northern California. It was the nicest place I'd ever been. It was on an olive tree farm. The guy travels to Israel as a farming consultant. And he's got a farm, and we stayed in their guest house about the size of my house. They had a shuffleboard court, a bocce ball court. They had a small lake with a huge slide going into it, 3 diving boards. They hunt in this little lake. It was unbelievable. And my wife and I were sitting outside one day, and I was just like, there was something in me where I was like, man, I feel like I need to apologize to my wife. I'm like, babe, I'm sorry, this will never happen to us. We will never find ourselves at a place like this except when someone lets us stay there. And she said, it's okay. It's okay, but something happens to us when we begin to elevate things and we think, oh, if I just had that, it would fulfill me. It would make me look better, and it would give me everything I've ever wanted. And so it could be money, it could be success, it could be prestige, it could be getting right into the right university. There are all kinds of things that could become an idol for you. And so what happens is those things take the place of the people in our life. And so we work way harder than we need to. Some of you work hard just to provide with your family. That's not what I'm talking about. It's those who feel like they have to make the next pay raise, they have to get the better job, or they have to, not that those are things that are bad, but anytime we elevate those things over people, it becomes an idol. And then anytime we elevate people over God. And so that's what this younger son has done, and he's done it by rebelling. He's done it by rebelling, and he's done it by running away from the Father. And so we choose to run from things, we do, and ultimately when we go to those things, what we're doing is we're running from God. We're running from God. And I want you to get this. What you are running to will never satisfy like what you are running from. What you are running to will never satisfy like what you are running from. Everything this boy is running to will never fulfill like the love of his father, what he has run from. Verse 14, it tells us that after he has spent everything, not in the moment, so not in this wild living, he doesn't ever stop and think, man, I probably shouldn't be doing this. He has to hit rock bottom. He has spent everything, this famine comes, he has nothing to eat. He finds himself working with pigs, and for most of us say, okay, what's the big deal of that? Jewish people despised pigs. They wouldn't eat it, but they wouldn't touch it. They would never work with pigs, and now he finds himself in the middle of them. He has hit the lowest point of his life. He's at the lowest point of his life. And look, this is what I know. There are consequences to our decisions. There are consequences to this boy's decisions. And I bet the father knew that was going to happen. I bet he knew it. I bet it hurt the father to see the boy take it all and to walk away and to think, I don't know if I'll ever see my boy again. And he goes and he spends it all, he wastes it all, looking for something that is going to fulfill him. He's so hungry that he's willing to eat what the pigs are eating, yet he can't even get anyone to give him those. He has absolutely nothing. Nothing. He left everything he needed, everything was provided for him, and he now finds himself with nothing. Are you there? Are you there? You could be a teenager. Are you there? You could be older. Are you there? Are you at that place? Are you at rock bottom? Are you to the place where you're like, I have nothing? I mean, I have my family, I have a job, but inside I have absolutely nothing. Are you there? Some of you were there. Some of you were there, and you know what that's like, and you, like this boy, came to his senses. So it says, at some point, this boy comes to his senses. He comes to the end of himself, basically, and says, what am I doing? What am I doing? Even my father's hired men have something to eat. Even the hired people with my father have a place in the house. And I am out here doing nothing. So he comes to his senses, and then he does what we all do when we've made bad decisions, whether it's with God or with people. He begins to come up with his speech. He begins to come up with his speech. Right? This is what I'm going to tell my father. We've done that. Teenagers, you do that. You make a poor decision. You know you're caught. You're like, all right, this is what I'm going to tell Dad. This is what I'm going to tell Mom. This is how I'm going to get out of it. And so he comes up with it. He comes up with it, and he says, all right, this is what I'll tell my father. And in doing that, he's completely broken. He's completely broken. And that's important. It's important for us to understand that he gets to a place where he's completely broken, and he realizes that the only place to go is back to his father. So he decides to go back, but this is super important. This is super important. He doesn't go back thinking that his dad will take him back as a son. As a son. He thinks, I'll go back, maybe he'll let me work for him. I'll earn my way back into right standing with the Father and back into the community. Because that's what would have had to happen. The community would have disowned him. And so for him to come back, he couldn't have lived in the community. He would have to come back and have to work. And at some point, the community and the Father maybe would take him back. And so he's thinking, if I could just go back as a hired servant, but not as a son. And so we find ourselves, verse 20. Verse 20. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. The father was waiting for him. Like, we don't know how long this boy's been gone. We don't know how long the father has stood on the porch and looks off in the distance and thinks, one of these days, my boy's going to come back. And I don't know if it just happened to be that day. I don't know if the rumor spreads that the boy's coming home, but the dad sees his boy coming and he runs to him. Now, get the picture if you're the son, how you feel about this. You've basically told your dad, I wish you were dead, and now you see him sprinting towards you. And he's getting ready. He has his speech ready. If I can just get it out before he does anything to me. And so he begins to get it out, and it's like the father doesn't even hear him. The father's not listening. Verse 22, but the father said to his servants, quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For the son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. So they began to celebrate. If you find yourself right now as a younger son, this is what God is doing, and this is how I look at it. That he's just waiting. He's just waiting for you to admit that you've hit rock bottom, and waiting for you to admit that you need to come home. And the Father is waiting, not to punish, not to make you work for it, but to freely give you this beautiful grace that the Father lavishes upon the younger son. And then this is amazing, that he puts a robe on him, the finest robe. That is to say, he is my son, not a hired servant, not a slave. I'm putting him back in my family. The robe was significant to say, he now belongs to me again. And then he gives him a ring, and this is how you would often pay for things, is with a ring. Now, remember, he already got his inheritance. He had already got what was his. And the dad says, here, go get the ring. And so when the boy needed anything, he would just show his ring. And this is what he'd say, my dad's good for it. My dad has paid for it. And then he would put sandals on his feet. The only people who would be barefoot would be the slaves and the hired servants. And he said, my boy's not a slave. My boy is not a hired servant. He is my son. And he puts him back in right standing with the family. Listen, this is unbelievable. This is completely countercultural to the people who were hearing it. And the Pharisees and the teachers of the law who don't like what Jesus is doing has to take a step back and say, how do I respond to this? How do I respond to the love of the Father like this? Because, a little clue to next week, the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, they're not the younger son. They're not the younger son. And so the sinners and the tax collectors are thinking, oh, that's me. That's me. Jesus is talking about me. That the Father sees me and loves me and is willing to take me in as his son or his daughter. And it doesn't happen by earning it. The boy doesn't have a chance to give his speech. The father shows affection first. He runs and begins to kiss him. And the response of the son is to begin to talk, and the father's like, no. You're mine. You have come home. I thought I would never see you again, and you are here, and we will celebrate. Really, really, really quickly, 4 things. If you take notes, I would encourage you to write these down. I said it earlier. What you are running to will never satisfy like what you are running from. I promise, I've experienced in my own life. What I have run to at times, and sometimes I've actually got, has never satisfied me like the love of the Father. It never will. Number 2, you can't run so far away from God that you can't turn and head home. You cannot run so far away. You could not doubt so much. You cannot disbelieve so much. You cannot live in this wild, outlandish life so much that the Father would not bring you back in. That you can't at some point come to your senses, turn and come home. The third thing, the Father is waiting on your return. He is waiting on your return and restores you back as a son or a daughter. He brings restoration and he brings forgiveness. This is for all of us to receive forgiveness. And then the final thing, and I hope you'll agree with me on this, we want to be a church for younger brothers, for younger sons. We want to be a church where people can come no matter what they've done, no matter what they're doing, a place where they can come and they can belong before they believe, before they get their lives in order. That this will be a place that all people can come and find hope and peace and forgiveness. We will be a place for younger sons. You, a lot of you are younger sons. And so you know what it's like. And so please be a community of people who welcome people into this community, who welcome people into this place, are not concerned or worried right now about what they're doing. We will, and we talked about this a couple weeks ago, we'll allow God to work on them. We'll allow God to work on you. It's not my responsibility to fix you. It's not my responsibility to judge you. I will teach and be faithful, but we will be a place for younger sons. Just pray with me. God, thank you so much for this story. Thank you so much that you are the Father in the story who brings us back into right standing, who are waiting for us when we have run from you. You are waiting for us to return. God, I pray for the people in the room who find themselves in that place in this story, that they have run and they have found themselves in need. God, would you encourage them today to come home? Would you encourage them to turn and to come back to you, God? Would you help them to accept forgiveness and love and peace? And more importantly, God, would you help us not to just long after your things, but to long after you as our Father and to have a relationship with you. God, would you begin to change us today? Help bring us back next week and help us as we look at the elder son and help us to find ourselves in that place in the story. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. Amen. Love you guys. See you next week.